So you've just got your DJI Action 2, or you're thinking of getting the DJI Action 2, and you just want to know all the features and settings of this camera without going through long guides. Well, this is the video for you. We'll be going through all the features, all the different modes, both within the camera itself and the app. So if you find this useful, hit the thumbs up button down below, and without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so this is the DJI Action 2. When you first turn it on, you will need to activate it. So you need to put in your password and username for your DJI account and activate the Action 2. Once you've done that for the first time, you're good to go. So you will see that the front screen module is actually on, and that's because it adds a couple of settings that I wanted to go through in this as well. And to address the elephant in the room, yes, it's definitely cracked at the top there. I put it on the chest mount, it fell off the chest mount, and it cracked. So yeah, don't use this without a case, guys. Okay, so we're going to start with the Action 2 off, and just to turn it on, all we've got to do is press the button on the top of the camera module, and you'll see that it tells us how much battery is remaining on the front touchscreen. Obviously, when you've got the camera module connected to the front screen module, the bottom module will actually charge the camera module. So we've got 100% on the camera module, and I think it said 49% still left on the front screen module. So if we just turn that around very quickly, you'll see that this screen is still active. Let me just focus that up. And basically, to switch to that screen, you can actually control the screen. So you need to just press it anywhere, and it'll ask you to swipe up. So if you just swipe up, then you have access to all the settings you have on the other screen. And again, it's the same if you want to just turn it back around and go to the back screen. To start using that screen again, you touch anywhere and swipe up. It's a good feature because then you don't accidentally touch the wrong screen when you're trying to use the front screen. Okay, so the Action 2 is very similar to other Action cameras or DJI products, where if you swipe from a certain corner, you'll be met with a different menu depending on which corner you swipe from. So we'll go through them in a minute, but I'm just going to go through what's on the screen when you turn it on. So we've got the remaining recording time up here. I've not got an SD card in here, but there is stuff on the built-in storage already. And that's 11 minutes 21 seconds left on 4K at 60 frames per second. Then we've got the battery life in the top right there. We've got the play indicator to indicate that if you swipe from that corner, you go to the playback menu. Then you've got the menu indicator to indicate that if you swipe from here, you've got the settings menu. Then you've got the setting that you're in down here. So this could be 4K 60. If I change that very quickly, swipe from the bottom, change it to, I don't know, 2.7K, 48 frames per second. My cat's getting involved there as well. And on the bottom right, you've got your zoom, which at the moment I'm just at 1x. But if you tap that and hold, you can then move it with your finger like that. Before the January 22 update, I was accidentally tapping that all the time, but now you have to sort of hold it a little bit more, take your finger off, and then you can zoom in and out. I wouldn't recommend doing it though, because it does ruin the quality quite a bit. Okay, so let's get into the menus, and let's start with the top. So here we've got your screen preferences. So what I've got it in the moment is it's showing a 16:9 image with black bars at the bottom and the top. So this is what is actually going to output this image here, is what's actually going to output when you watch it back. But you can actually go in and change it to full screen. So the image will fill up the full screen, but the disadvantage is you do miss some actual video footage at the sides. So when you do go and put it into post-production, you're going to see a little bit extra at the sides there. So I always like to see what I'm recording at all times, so I turn full screen off. But experience-wise, it's a lot more fun, obviously, having the image filling up the full screen. So I'm going to turn the full screen off. And then you have screen lock. So if you just wanted to lock the screen so you couldn't touch any of the settings, very useful if you're in an action scenario, or whether you just dialed in your settings and you don't want to change anything, and you're worried that your hands might sort of get involved too much, then you can obviously lock the screen like that. And again, all you do is swipe to unlock that. Then you've got the storage. So if you go into that, it will tell you how much is on your internal storage, how much is on your SD card. And you can also switch your storage to your SD card as well, but I don't have an SD card in there. And then you can format your internal storage from here as well. So all you do is go to format, and then you swipe, and that would format all your images. I don't want to do that yet because I've got stuff to show you. So if I go back, and then we've got a little settings icon here. And this is just sort of your general settings. So in the settings menu, the first thing you have is the voice control. You can turn that on or off. So I'm going to turn it on, then you can set the language. And you can also go into the list of voice commands just so it can tell you what sort of things you can do with the voice commands. So if I keep that on and come back into the main menu and say, start recording, stop recording, and you'll see it's as simple as that. I'll keep that off though, just because I prefer to do it manually. So let's go back into that. Then you have the vibration notification. Obviously when you turn certain settings on or off, and when you start recording you get a vibration, you can turn this off. This might save a little bit of battery life, but personally I don't see why you'd need to turn it off. It's quite a nice little notification to know when you've started recording or taken a photo. Okay, so the next thing you have is snapshot mode. And this basically allows you to record a clip, a quick clip, or hyperlapse while the camera is off. So a lot of small cameras have this feature because the aim is to shoot as fast as possible. So you want to be able to just tap the button when the camera is off and it will automatically start recording. So I will show you an example of this, but I prefer to keep this off just because the camera automatically turns off once you stop recording. And I haven't actually found a way to turn the camera on normally with the snapshot mode on, even holding the button. I've tried tapping the button, I've tried pressing both buttons. If any of you know how this works or if this is just a glitch on my unit, then let me know. But I got stuck in the snapshot mode and couldn't get out of it for quite a while. So yeah, I'll keep this one off. Next one is your wireless connection. So you can obviously go in, see your wireless info, which is your device name and your password there. Your frequency, 5.8 or 2.4. Or you can reset your connection at the bottom there. So then you can go into your video compression and you can go HEVC, which is H.265, I believe, and then you can have H.264. H.264 is easier on your editing software, so it'll be nice to edit, whereas HEVC is more compressed, so you'll get more footage for your storage. But HEVC will be harder to edit. So yeah, if you need something that's really easy to edit on a PC that's maybe not as powerful, you want to go for H.264, but you're obviously going to get less out of your space. If you go for efficiency, you're going to get more out of your space, but it's going to be harder to edit. So underneath that, you can turn sounds on or off when you start recording, or turn the camera on or off. It always beeps, so if you didn't want that, you can actually turn that off. Then you've got your grid, which if we go back to here, you'll see it's basically a rule of thirds grid, which is quite useful if you're trying to master your framing. Then we have the anti-flicker mode, which I've got set to auto, but generally if you're in the UK, 50 Hertz is best. If you're somewhere in the US, then 60 Hertz is best. But I keep it on auto because it generally does a really good job. Underneath that, you've got the auto stop record temperature. Now in the UK, I believe you can't actually put it to high. In the first version of the firmware I got, I could put it to high. But now it's just set to standard. If you set this to high, it basically allows the camera to get warmer before it'll automatically turn off. But in the UK, I think there's some sort of temperature threshold that a product can legally get to. So we can't actually set it to higher here. But if you are having problems with overheating, then I recommend going into this setting and putting it to high if you have the option. Underneath that, we have this very long option for screen off when locked. So if we tick that on, go back, lock the screen, and that'll turn the screen off instead. So if you tap it, and you can swipe to open just like that. So again, if you want to lock your screen, if you've got it maybe attached to your chest or somewhere where you can't see it, and then you want to lock the screen, maybe save some battery life, then you can use that feature. Another one is screen off when recording, does exactly the same thing. It's pretty self-explanatory. Next one is auto power off, so you can choose how long it waits with you not actually pressing any buttons or recording for it to turn off. I've got it set to 5 minutes, which is the default, I believe. So the next thing you have is this LED light switch. So you see here, there's an LED light, and if I turn the camera around, up here, you've also got an LED light. So if I turn that switch off, then you'll see that one turns off, and so it does that one. So let's swipe up again. So then you've got macro lens detection, which basically, obviously you can buy the DJI macro lens for this, and this will just make sure that it detects that this lens is attached to it. The next thing, which I think they've just added in the January 22 firmware, is the horizon calibration. So if you go onto that, place the unit on a flat surface and then start the calibration. And then when you're using horizon steady or horizon level, it will try and keep it to what you've calibrated to. I'm not going to do it now because I'm not convinced this is on a flat surface on this tripod. We're going to scroll up again. We have the option to continue last live stream. I've not actually used this for live stream, to be quite honest, but if you do have the DJI Mimo app, you can use it for live streaming, and again, that's still pretty self-explanatory. So the next, you have the language, obviously, and at the very bottom of the settings, you can factory reset your camera, you can view your device information, like your firmware, and you can click on compliance info, which basically shows you a load of stuff you probably don't want to read. So that's all of the settings within that menu. So you see, if we just swipe to the right, now we have some more settings in here. So we have the Pro mode on at the moment, but you can turn that off. If it's on, it's yellow, and if it's off, it's white. I'm going to keep it off at the moment just so I can show you the difference between the two. Then we have the voice control on or off shortcut. I just showed you in the other menu, we could turn voice control on or off, but that's just a quicker way to do it. Then we have the orientation lock. So let's say you turn the action to the left and it automatically starts, moving everything to horizontal. You can set it so it doesn't actually do that. Then finally, we have the brightness. So you can easily turn the brightness up and down to save some battery. So again, we're out of Pro mode at the moment. I just want to say that. So let's swipe up and see what we have in the menus. So now if we swipe from the right, we have our actual camera settings. So the only thing you get when you're not in Pro mode is this field of view. So this is the standard de-warped field of view, which is a bit more zoomed in, but you can go wide, and if you want, you can even go ultra wide. Obviously this is going to be much more warped, but it's definitely adds to the action camera look if that's what you're into. I always keep it on standard just because I prefer a kind of non-action camera look, and I like the stabilization from it. So now let's activate Pro mode, and I'll show you the differences in the settings. And go back into the actual camera settings. And here we have a lot more to play with. So the first thing we have is exposure. If I click that, you see it says auto here, and you can change it so that you can, let's say you want to overexpose by plus 1.7 on the EV, you can, and it will just auto expose for that. And then you can set your ISO ranges here. So let's say you didn't want it to go above a certain ISO, 1600 maybe, you just leave it like that, and it's still on auto, but it won't go over that ISO. I always keep it on the highest just because if I think it needs 12,800 ISO, it probably does. And then I'm going to switch over to manual by clicking this M button. And then obviously you can adjust the shutter speed manually on the left and the ISO on the right. If you're wondering where aperture is, obviously on action cameras, it's a fixed aperture, so you won't be able to change that. And then we can just go back to auto. And press confirm. It's a bit of a long-winded way to change your settings manually, so if you do want to use an action camera from manual settings, it is a little bit fiddly. So we have the white balance, pretty similar situation. We can have auto white balance and it picks one for you, or you can go to a manual white balance and you can scroll through. To 10k Kelvin to 2000 Kelvin. I was actually just quite curious as to what the range was on that, but you've got quite a lot of range there to play with. And let's go back into the auto white balance and press confirm. Next thing we have is the color mode. So we've obviously got a normal color or D-Cine-like. Normal color is the baked in color. D-Cine-like is a bit of a flatter profile. So if you're going to do some editing or color grading, then put it into D-Cine-like and you get a bit more flat colors so you can add them in later. Then we've got the field of view, which we just spoke about. You get exactly the same settings here. Now if we switch over to this, the microphone view, these settings are only available because I've got the front screen module attached. For example, if I click on channel, you get mono or stereo. If you've got only the camera module, you can only get mono audio because it's only got one microphone. But if you've got the front facing screen module, you can have stereo audio because there's microphones all around this module as well. The same is true with wind noise reduction. It's only available when you've got a couple more microphones on the front screen module. And then the bottom option is directional audio. So it depends on what you're filming. If you're filming vlogging, you might want the directional audio just to be front. If you're standing behind the camera, but you're also filming something in front of the camera, then it's good to have front and back, or you can just leave it to all if you just want it to capture everything around it. So that's all the camera settings that you can have in Pro mode. It's worth noting also that if you swipe in the middle, you can choose between your different modes. So you've got photo, video, quick clip, slow-mo, or time-lapse. And all you have to do to change between those is to either swipe in the middle or double tap the top button and then keep tapping the button until you get to the setting you want. Okay, so let's swipe from the bottom now. And we've got all of our resolutions, frame rates, and steady options as well, so our stabilization options. Also, you'll see here in the middle, if you're at some of the higher resolutions and frame rates, it will tell you approximately how long it will last before the camera will shut off. Let's go through some of these resolutions and frame rates. So the very lowest you can have is 1080p power reserve at 24 frames per second. I'm assuming this is a super low bitrate 1080p. I don't see why you would ever really want to use it unless you're on your last couple of percentages of battery and you really need to capture something. So you can do that in up to 60 frames per second. Then we've got 1080p in 24 to 240 frames per second. Then we've got 2.7K in 24 to 120 frames per second. Then we've got 2.7K in 4:3. So 4:3 basically makes it a little bit taller, so you've got more to play with on the top and the bottom, but you've still got the same amount on the left and the right. So you'll see on the edge here, you've got my boom pole, and if I change it to 16:9, it's exactly the same on the edge. It just gives you a little bit on the top and the bottom. So you've got that in up to 60 frames per second. Because you're using the full width of the sensor, it won't let you do it at 120 frames per second because it takes more processing power to record in 4:3. Then you've got 4K in 16:9, which you can do in 24 to I think 120 frames per second. Then you've got 4K in 4:3, which is the same as what I just mentioned. The setting you probably wouldn't want to be using most of the time is 4K at 16:9. If you do use 4:3, you probably need to edit it to go either on a 16:9 timeline, or if you're shooting vertical, you need to edit it to a vertical timeline. But in 16:9, it's obviously just straight out of camera. You'll notice in the top right here, we have RS. So if we click that, it's our different steady modes. So this is off, and you'll notice it zoomed out quite a bit from when I was in rock steady. So let's quickly go to there. So that's stabilization off. Again, I'd probably only use this when you're on a tripod. Stabilization off, you're not going to get very steady shots at all. If I move this over to steady, steady's been introduced in a recent firmware update, and basically what it does is it zooms into the image and still provides the same amount of stabilization as rock steady, but because it has to stabilize less of the image, it can actually control that heat a little bit more. It requires a little bit less processing power, and so you'll get a bit more out of it before it overheats. Rocksteady keeps that wideness of the frame and stabilizes it exactly the same as steady, but because it's a wider frame and it's stabilizing a bit more, it will overheat quicker. And we've got horizon balancing, which will basically keep the horizon steady even at a 45-degree angle. Again, this is a new feature that's been added in the January 2022 firmware update, where you can have horizon balancing up to 45 degrees in 4K. But you'll see if we go over to 2.7K and click this, you also get the option for horizon steady. Okay, this isn't the best setup to show it in, but in horizon steady, you'll see if I turn the camera right around, that horizon is staying perfectly steady. Whereas if I move over to horizon balancing, I can get to about 45 degrees, but as soon as I go past that, it will start to move the horizon. So again, in 2.7K, you can do horizon steady, and you can flip the camera right around. In 4K, you can only do horizon balancing, which balances the horizon up to 45 degrees. And the last thing you have on your frame rate and resolution screen is this little button here, which sets your loop duration. If you just wanted to do a loop, you can set it to max 5 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour, but obviously I haven't got storage to do that. If we go over to photo mode, we have a couple of different options down the bottom, of course. So if we swipe from the bottom, we have just our aspect ratio, which is either 4:3 or 16:9. And then we have a countdown timer at the bottom, which you can do up to 10 seconds. And if you swipe from the right, you have your auto exposure, white balance, field of view like we mentioned before, but you also have the format. You can change between JPEG and RAW. As far as I'm aware, there's no way to do both JPEG and RAW on this, which is kind of disappointing. So if we swipe now to the quick clip mode, we can swipe from the bottom. We can set our quick clip duration, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, or 30 seconds. We can set the resolutions and frame rates just like before. And if we scroll over now to slow-mo and scroll from the bottom, we get our options of resolutions, and this time at the bottom there's just speed rather than frame rates. So it's obviously going to slow it down for you automatically. So if you're going 4K, you can get up to 4 times speed. In 2.7K, 4 times speed. And in 1080p, you can do 4 times or 8 times, because obviously in 1080p, you might have noticed before, we could record in 240 frames per second, whereas 2.7K and 4K were limited to 120 frames per second. Essentially what it's doing is filming in these frame rates but slowing it down for you automatically. And finally we have the time-lapse function here, which is pretty obvious. You swipe from the bottom again and it allows you to do a time-lapse or a hyperlapse. A hyperlapse basically creates a video and speeds it up, whereas a time-lapse will take a photo every couple of seconds. There's also some presets here: crowds, clouds, sunset, or custom. If you set a custom one, you can actually swipe up and you get your interval. So if you want to take a photo every 0.5 seconds, you can, and you can go all the way up to a photo every 40 seconds. Underneath that, we've got the duration, and basically this will set the duration of your time-lapse. Where we're recording in an interval of 40 seconds between each photo at the moment, if you do the time-lapse for 5 minutes, you're not even making a second worth of footage. But if I move that over to 3 hours, for example, you'll see you will get a 9-second time-lapse from that. If I move down to something more realistic, so like a 10-second interval, you'll see that if we record for an hour on a 10-second interval, we can get 12 seconds of footage. So it's a really handy sort of way of knowing just with a video duration counter there. So we go back. If you go into the custom modes, it will tell you in the middle. So it says 10 minutes at 0.5 seconds between each photo. Clouds will be 10 minutes at 2 seconds per photo. Sunset is an hour at 3 seconds between each photo. And again, the custom mode that we were just in. Up on the top right, you can set the actual resolution you want the final video to be in. I'd always have it in 4K personally. And on the top left, you can set whether you want the camera screen to turn off while you're doing the time-lapse. When you're back on the main screen, you'll notice under here, it says 4K and a photo every 10 seconds. And at the top here, it will say you're recording for 60 minutes and you're getting 12 seconds worth of footage from that. So really handy indicators on the main screen here. And if we swipe from the left, we've got the preview window, which will automatically start playing the last video. If you click up the top left here, you can see your video in a grid view over here. So swipe down to something a little bit more interesting and start playing the video. Because we've got the front screen module on, the sound is on, but you can turn that off as well by clicking this button up here. If you swipe from the left, you can also favorite that item or delete it as well. It will vibrate as well when you click delete if you've got that on. But when you play, you can also just scrub through a little bit as well, which is quite nice. And that is every single setting on the DJI Action 2 within the actual camera. So let's move over to the app and I'll just go through where those settings are on the app. Okay, so we've switched over to the app. So let's get straight into what we're seeing on the app at the moment. And you see on the right is our list of the different modes, pretty similar to what we had before, but we've got live stream added to that as well. So we've got photo, video, quick clip, slow motion, time lapse, and hyperlapse. And the time lapse and hyperlapse are actually on different modes this time, whereas in camera they were on the same sort of category. So obviously we have the record button here, and we also have our preview button down on the bottom right here, which opens up the preview window. And then we can just click on a video and play it like so. And that plays pretty clearly. And then from there you can either favorite it, you can save it to the album, or you can download it onto your phone. And then on the bottom left, you've got delete button there. So let's go back. A little extra that you get in the app is on the bottom here, you actually get to see your shutter speed and your ISO, even when you're in auto mode, which you can't do on the Action on its own unless you're actually in the settings changing them around. Obviously on the left here, you've also got the zoom button. So if you click that, you can zoom in or out like that. So if you click this auto button on the left here, you'll see that this is your exposure settings again. So we're in auto, the maximum ISO is 12,800. The ISO at the moment is 1250 and the shutter is 1/120 because we're in 60 frames per second at 4K. So it automatically doubles that shutter speed. And again, you can change the exposure compensation if you wanted to slightly overexpose with these buttons here. If you wanted to, you could go over to manual mode by clicking this M here. And then obviously you can change the shutter speed and the ISO manually. Let's say you wanted to go right down to 1/60 so you didn't have to bump up the ISO so much. And there we go. Let's put that back to auto. So the button underneath this on the left, it just says in tiny little letters there 4K 60. So if you click that, you've got your resolutions and frame rates like you had before. Exactly the same resolutions and frame rates. Except with the 4K and the 2.7K don't have the 16:9 next to them, but it's kind of assumed that they are because the other options have the 4:3. So now if we go over to the other options, so let's go back into photo and click the resolutions. We've got either 4:3 or 16:9, and then obviously down here we've got the countdown timer as well. To get into that photo format that we saw before, you have to click the three dots on the bottom left. And then at the bottom there's photo format, and you can change that between JPEG and RAW. In time-lapse mode we have our duration up here, so we're recording for an hour and we're getting 12 seconds of footage, and we're taking a photo every 10 seconds. Hopefully that's clear up there. If we click that arrow, we can then change the duration and the interval as well. If we go into the settings over here, we can just change the resolution between 1080p, 2.7K and 4K, exactly like we could on the camera. And on the app, you can actually go to the three dots in the bottom left and change the format of your time lapse so that instead of coming out as a video, it will come out as either JPEGs and a video or RAW photos and a video. This can be helpful if you just want every single RAW photo that it's taken in that time lapse so that you can edit them a bit more before putting them into a video. But if you just want it to make a video for you from the time lapse, which most people will, you can just click video and go straight into that. Hyperlapse is a very similar thing, but instead of taking lots of photos, you're basically taking a whole video and speeding it up. So if you go into the resolutions here, you've got 1080p, 2.7K and 4K. You can actually choose the power reserve feature in 1080p, of course, as well. And then you've got speed. So this is just how much you want it to speed up your hyperlapse, depending on what sort of look you're going for. So we're back in video mode, and let's go into the three dots on the bottom left here. And you see that we can enable the pro mode, which is what we were just on, to enable a bit more settings. You can also change the loop recording. So again, between 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. And you can change the field of view like we could on the actual camera as well. Ultra wide, wide and standard. Then we can change the stabilization mode here as well between rock steady, steady and horizon balancing there as well. Again, we can turn the grid on and off, which is the rule of thirds there. But you also get an extra of the grid and diagonals. So this just shows those diagonal lines across as well. From here, you can also set your white balance to auto or custom. You can change the color mode between normal and decine like I mentioned earlier. But you can also put on overexposure alerts and your histogram. So you see, if I try and overexpose a little bit, by whacking the ISO right up, you'll see these zebra sort of lines starting to appear, and that basically means that part of the image is overexposed. So if you wanted to bring that down to an area where only a little bit is overexposed, then you've obviously got that light, bright light there which is overexposed, which won't matter too much. But that's quite handy in knowing if you're overexposed or not. And then obviously you've got your histogram down here, which you can move around the screen as well. If you click the four squares down here, you've got your general settings. So the first option is syncing all downloaded files to the phone album. So basically there's a phone album on your DJI app, but you can also download the clips to actual phone. This basically just does both at the same time, so you don't have to worry about having two separate albums. You've got the voice control toggle, again the video compression between HEVC and H.264, the auto flicker, the stop recording temperature, which again I can't set to high, and your Wi-Fi settings, and about pretty much exactly the same as what you had in the camera. So the main difference is really between having it in the camera and having it on the app are the access to the live stream functionality, and a couple of extra things in terms of getting your histograms and your overexposure alert. A quick correction before I round up on the time-lapse function on the actual action itself. If you swipe from the right, you can change the format between video in JPEG, and video in RAW. So you can do that on both the app and the actual action itself. So that was complete features and settings guide of the DJI Action 2. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. It's pretty similar to other small cameras and DJI cameras on the market. So it's really easy to get used to where everything is in the settings. So if it's been helpful, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to see more videos like this on filmmaking on the go, do subscribe. And if you've got any comments or questions about the DJI Action 2, put them down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.